Hello, dear friends, guests, subscribers to my channel, to Alexei's channels. This is our joint stream, and we're recording it on the 11th of 2025 and 11th of November. Everything is, as always, hot and steamy from fresh news and events happening. Alexei, it appears that everything is heating up in Ukraine for the second day. Bankova Street, where president residence and leadership is located, continues to concoct different ways, different methods to implement, and we will definitely talk about these new developments and the scandal that is brooding around Zelensky. I was asked by many people, how can they? Why are they doing that? Apparently, yeah, they can, and we'll try to dive into why. A lot of people, though, are expecting that Zelensky is lucky and he might survive this scandal. Quick housekeeping note, there are two barcodes at the bottom of the screen. The one on the left allows you to leave a question for our stream in advance on our YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel. And at the very end of our stream, at the second hour, we talk about some of these questions that you guys post. And, of course, today's poll. It has the following questions. What do you think President's office will use to counter the scandal? A. Attack on Russia or new Kursk event, something bright and shiny. Second option, revival of Istanbul negotiations. Umerov is already there, perhaps they will revive this vector. Third option, Bankova will start replacing ministers with loud scandals. And fourth option, nothing can help them survive. This is a countdown. So, Alexei, everybody was waiting for your appearance on our stream, and which option would you choose? Alexander, remember I mentioned a while ago that Zelensky will likely be done with by November, and people were laughing, saying, well, it's November and he's still around. Well, it is November, and this is the beginning of his end. Of course, he may struggle till the end of May next year, probably another 6 months, but we'll see. Now, let's expand the framework to understand the situation better. Trump recently mentioned that both sides do not agree to compromise. That's on one hand. On the other hand, he wants to finish this war. That means that both sides need to be persuaded to compromise, and Russia got some persuasion with additional sanctions and scares that Ukraine will get tomahawks, which we have not yet. And the second side is Ukraine, that you can only shift its position by persuading Zelensky personally, and since he is rather well known in world politic arena that he is a scandalous person, and even in the White House he can throw a tantrum. So they apparently decided to use means that have been in their disposal for a while, but they were not used. They've been withheld. And when it becomes known that there are 15,000 notes in this case against corruption, against Zelensky's government, it appears that they've done the research as if it was just completed yesterday and they started to review it now. No, most of this case was actually built even under Democrats before Trump, and it's just being realized now. And the peculiarity of how they implement this punishment is that it's being done via Ukrainian organs, not via American. And that gives America additional leeway to say, listen, it's Ukraine internally figuring out how corrupt they are. And also whitewash some of their involvement about this case, basically denying knowledge of how did a ton of cash money appear in Zelensky's office. So the backdrop of this scandal, energy systems collapse. A lot of people are spending up to 12 hours without electricity daily. And apparently the government was stealing money over this scandal, and part of this money was transferred to Russia via a spy pyramid with Derkach on top, and involvement up to the Minister of Energy and Vice Prime Minister Chernyshov, ex-VP. But there are more scandals. If one dives deeper in the defense manufacturing, you'll find a lot more scandals at a much higher scale. And as you understand that energy systems that's making money on heat and convenience of citizens, and military manufacturing that's making money on the blood of soldiers. I don't want to be a prophet here, but I need to take this position for half a second and say, remember, I told you, and not because I told you, not because I'm so smart, but because that was visible in a certain way. If you remember what FBI in the United States was mentioning, how they tried to mess with Trump during his elections, big politics tried to bring these events, these research materials to the top. Some forces and other forces were blocking it. Zelensky tried to wiggle his way out of it, to not be called a world-class corruptioner, but finally it does bubble up. And here's the materials, here's the investigation, so it all comes up orderly in a proper fashion. And then there is one more factor, that this countdown, the countdown for Ukraine to join EU, that countdown is dismantled. Now Ukraine is not even going for that. They likely will not see any option in the near future. First of all, Ukrainians are not well versed in digging through parliamentary documents of Europe. And in Europe, you can dig the recent publications where European Parliament has the most demolishing report that talks about violations of human rights, about corruption, and that basically Ukraine, it'll take them a long time to even be considered in Europe. And now Moldova, by the way, is being decoupled from Ukraine and Georgia. Remember, there was these three countries were mentioned as trifecta of possible joining the EU. And now EU is focusing their attention on removing Moldova from this trifecta and allowing Moldova to expeditiously join EU. And they're talking about Moldova joining EU by 2028. And nobody is talking about Ukraine joining EU up to 2040 at least. And nobody even winking at that. So very soon, I think, we'll hear that Ukraine is definitely not on the table officially. So there were several calls also that can be transcribed to a simple language so that people understand in the light of this corruption, Moldova being decoupled. The calls are about Zelensky being tiresome for different politicians. And now imagine a Ukrainian who's sitting at home for 7 to 12 hours without electricity. Some of his relatives are dead or wounded or fighting on the front. And they're understanding that, okay, Arestovych was talking about that, and in the news we're seeing that EU likely will not happen. Then what the heck did we fight for? We also observed that a lot of money was stolen on the energy systems. And by the way, the money were transferred to Moscow directly. So we do have Russian spies to the level of Vice Prime Minister, who was appointed by our beloved president, supposedly. Okay, and likely there are more spies. So that's the feeling of a knife in a bag in a cold, dark apartment under a threat of a front that can collapse, which we will talk about a bit later. So all that horror that requires some brain capacity and time to understand and unpack. And now Ukrainians will have to expand their worldview, their picture of how they see this world. And they need to expand their attention. They need to allow some thoughts that they were trying to avoid for several years. And including that, yeah, there are a lot of spies in the government, a lot of people working for Moscow. And many of them were legally and lawfully appointed and elected. And if there'll be the next scandal about the military defense, the military production complex, then that likely will pass the threshold of their ability to cope with the situation. Because I do talk with a lot of Ukrainians. They're trying to grasp at straws. They're saying not everybody can be a spy there, right? There was just one network of them, of course, in a very sensitive area of the economy, and President still probably didn't know, and he is trying to punish them now. My dear friends, he knew everything, and without his appointments and knowledge and nods, all that would not be possible to organize. The organizer likely was on the earmark, and President was likely just nodding and closing his eyes. And the tapes from that apartment that were leaked, that were part of the prosecution effort, can actually prove that. Alexander, a couple more minutes. I would really want to be wrong. I would love for everything that I said since September of 23 for the last couple of years, that to be wrong. For the last couple of years, I was called somebody who is barking at ghosts, somebody who doesn't see the situation, who invents things. But now you start seeing several lines gathering together into one effort, one fist that will likely break the back of Ukraine's government. This was just a lengthy process. I would give a lot to be wrong, but life does reveal itself, regardless of my opinions. Alexei, it seems that right now, just one small push with finger can cause a huge crumble or collapse in the Ukrainian leadership. Official position of the office is that, sure, investigation needs to be aided. We should not have or allow corruption. But right now we already hear that there are some materials against Chernyshov, who is ready to work with the investigation. Umerov mentioned that Mindich was coercing him into purchasing bad quality bulletproof vests, and that is mentioned in the materials. Materials are saying that Umerov was coerced or pushed, and he was aware of the quality of these vests. Umerov came out saying that no, he was not aware of that specific model. They found some others that didn't work, and we did not sign off on them, and he's ready to cooperate with the investigation. So now it seems that there are two options that we can observe in the near future. That A, the corruption networks are ready, and they covered their backyards, so it's difficult to catch them, or they'll go to the end. They'll go fighting and they'll go down in flames. Well, Alexander, the beauty of Ukraine is that all scenarios are usually happening at the same time, in parallel. And most people in the countries where I travel see that likely this energy system is going to be fed to Ukraine citizens, because this one has a Moscow trace, and that's why they're all ready to cooperate. And this is a chosen setup, since this was already known and investigated and becomes loud, that it's difficult to leave that scandal quiet. So they decided to do damage control and pick the least damaging scandal. And by the way, who helped Mindich to leave the country several hours before arrest, right? Apparently, it is one of the prosecutors in that system who helped him to evade. And we need to understand that even prosecutor's office is also rather corrupt. So as one friend of mine said, that it's curious to observe the interaction of your national corruptioners with our international corruption bodies. And we can understand that in a bigger picture, if they fail to control this process, that snowball may acquire the uncontrollable speed and damage that people who organized this scandal, who wanted to present it as success over the Russian spies and stuff, they may probably have not calculated it properly, the outcomes. And imagine now people will start leaking on each other. There might be more materials showing up. Nobody knows what will. And there is still a version that it was American administration that pushed this document pile into production. And they can play a dual role here. NABU agency in Ukraine may be telling Zelensky that, sure, we have agreed, and watch us, we'll jail the bad people, and then we'll reappoint some of your people. We'll switch Galushenko from one position to another, and you will be okay. But they may also be deceiving, or that can be an operative game, and they can be leaking more materials as it goes. So the key point here is whether it is truly inspired by American administration, or whether NABU themselves, the Ukrainian independent investigative agency, started that. Then there will be some agreements internally to save some butts on Zelensky's office. But if it is pushed by America, then it'll be harder to wiggle their way out of this. They will still try, but it'll be more difficult. I don't know exactly the source of this push. It seems to me that it may be NABU itself that started this scandal. If there'll be more scandalous things coming out, more damaging things, that perhaps it is not NABU seeking for agreement and perks with the president's office. So in some option, of course, this is the element of pressure on Zelensky's office for foreign partners, but and they might use this lever, but we don't know yet. That's why I would tell our viewers, do not be too rushed to be giddy and happy. And the office of the president is surprisingly calm right now. That also puts a stone on the weight of the second theory. They had some anti-crisis statement, but it was rather funny and mellow. So answering the question, how will they distract the society? They may not even try to. They may just continue living and doing stuff as they do. Now, again, we're at war. If it was peace, there would be another Maidan, 100%. But right now there is a threat of a front. Russia is attacking us daily. Plus, additionally, the West has not supplied additional resources for another Maidan. There are no more boys with cardboards and girls. So the West is not actively pursuing that, apparently. I'm not seeing any funded or otherwise inspired protests yet. So that's why I'm thinking there probably is going to be some inner agreement between NABU and President's office. This is most probable in my view, but it can be managed, a situation like this, but it could be a part of a bigger picture with more steps down the line. I would not be too giddy about, this will be the complete end right now, but the fact itself remains that highest political leadership directly linked to Zelensky, his friends like Mindich, who do not take official positions, but who provide aid in exploiting and corrupting our systems, including energy and military manufacturing, and additional layer of Russian spies on top of that were draining money towards Russia and providing some management over what is being done and where. Apparently these networks are being built since 2022. And the peculiar thing I want to note that even when I was at the office, if we invented some ways to reroute energy through different transformers, through different systems in Ukraine, after some of them are being damaged, during the next attack from Russia, those new pathways were targetedly destroyed. So one can ask a lot of questions here. How did that become known? And now Galushenko is the Minister of Justice. You cannot approach him that easily, and he is working on the corruption in the presidential office. This action can be sanctioned only by the president. So Galushenko cannot investigate officials at his own volition. Independent prosecutors, investigators supposedly can. But in any case, this is a good beginning. The whole sector of national security and defense that was in the key group of most important networks and most important offices in the country, like a heartbeat for human body, was apparently corrupted with Russian special services aid, and money were transferred over to Russia. So this is super cynical, Alexei, what they've done with that. And I want to bring to light a couple more items here to shine light on this duality, one way or the other. First, I did not understand this news that specialized prosecutor's office returned money to Sternenko, the money that they confiscated. Right, he is the SBU, the Ukrainian security figure, but that's a secondary thing for him, Alexander. He's the agent of the left wing of Democratic Party of the United States, and those specialists who served in Ukraine during the times of Ulyana Suprun. There is a note out there that he was actually dating the grandkid of Ulyana. Oh, you mean like real relations? Yeah. Okay, that's an interesting fact to consider. That's on one hand. On the other hand, Alexei, we see hysteria that this NABU, Ukrainian investigative agency, is fighting against Ukraine, is actually supporting Russia. Oh yeah, this is the anti-crisis pamphlet from Petrov, who hopes that he will not be asked to serve in the Ukrainian army, and maybe they'll even shove a few dollars up his panties. Don't take it too seriously. So what then we do with the Russian trace in this story, Alexei? You should ask the counterintelligence of SBU what is their opinion on that. And DBR, of course, because DBR determines and works with the higher level of executives of Ukraine, and SBU can investigate Russian influence. They can create joint groups to investigate that. And the problem is that their joint groups, up until now, usually end up taking some of the NABU people who've been investigating or maybe corrupt, who is being interrogated and in jail, and Telegram channels are arguing which of these services helps Russia more. Alexei, do you like or dislike the suggestion of Poroshenko, who seems to have revived from ashes like Phoenix, and who suggests to dismantle the cabinet of ministers and replace them with a cabinet of ministers of national unity? Listen, Alexander, these measures should have been taken back in 22nd. Today, this is like putting band-aids on the dead body. Poroshenko's agenda is completely targeting inner political leadership, and he's targeting the current power to poke them again, who will, of course, not do what he suggests. Second, to perhaps diminish his risks on the criminal investigations, because if his ministers would be part of that cabinet, it'll be easier for him to get rid of the accusations and criminal prosecutions. And of course, third is to add more to his PR. And if you look at his statements, basically he blames Zelensky from everything since the dinosaurs' extinction. And Poroshenko's party is apparently faultless and fantastic and should be voted for. But I would remind that during Poroshenko times, those were the times when people were transferring money in big duffel bags between different ministries and between the corruption elements of the society. So I think, in my view, we need to dismantle not only the cabinet of ministers, but a lot of congressmen too, and a lot of administration, and conduct a whole mass lustration of who is involved in what. It's impossible to do during the war times, but hopefully can be done after the war is over. But I can not be an optimist, right? So hypothetically, if Trump is meeting with anybody, since he is meeting with Joulani it was very mild, not much press, yet the meeting was actually happening. So they do have a celebration rather. In the United States, Republicans have prevailed over the Democrats and shutdown is coming to an end. So we can see in the videos that there is a tribune with people making statements, journalists asking questions, and somebody asks a question about insignia on the money that is being recovered in Ukraine. Do you think that one word of that caliber shot at Zelensky's address near the White House may cause a lot more damage to Zelensky? No, Alexander. This situation and this power is much stronger than one word or one scandal. This whole agent thing with transferring money from electric grids to Russia and higher Ukrainian leadership involved in that scandal, that will probably not dismantle Zelensky by itself, and I would not be surprised if a lot of figures involved in this scandal will be let go without any punishment or just let leave the country. There are too many interests entangled in Ukraine, unfortunately, including, of course, American side. Nothing is too simple. And Joulani is one of the first examples of that. His executives, his soldiers are killing some of the Christians. And today, Trump mentions that if that will continue with Christians, but where? In Nigeria, then they'll have to intervene. Meantime, in Syria and Sudan, Christians are being attacked too. And Trump is not mentioning that because there is something to fight for in Nigeria. There is a big game that America can play there against China and Russian Federation. But in the north with Sudan, it's pretty remote and there is nothing to go for up there. So big politics definitely is involved, and it's not moral. These questions cannot be asked from the point of view of morality in the big politics. It doesn't play there. Just retribution and morals have no weight there. Now, if Zelensky will start doing what the United States needs him to do, suddenly, he will all of a sudden become a good and nice fellow. And there'll be interesting publications explaining that he does have some elements of corruption, like Chernyshov and Mindich in his government, but Zelensky himself is crystal clear. He's actually, even helping the investigation. And sadly, jurisprudence and law is not independent from big politics. You cannot put Trump in a position where he will repent and start attacking Zelensky with one question. Here, if something may happen, perhaps the only option would be some unplanned upheaval or uprising of people in Ukraine. But will that be instigated by a situation on the front, by collapses there, or by energy systems? But even this, I think, has a very low probability. So they'll be pushing it further, and if somehow it will slow down to spring of 26, then yeah, I think eventually there'll be not just Maidan, there'll be 4 Maidans in Ukraine. But for now, this is just a storm in the interwebs. Even if there'll be 2, 3, 4 more scandals, I do not see another political leader in Ukraine who would lead people with the country fighting a war and having collapsing elements of the front. With that backdrop, who will lead an uprising against Zelensky. So in this picture, we can see Moscow agents, Moscow spies, infiltration. We see Ukrainian leadership who is involved with them, who is corrupt, who is participating in deaths of their own people because of their corruption. And they'll be coming to the media, to the TV screens nightly and talking about replacing some corrupt elements and going on further and forward and hoping to win. And this will continue until the moment there is enough revolt in society, or until something drastic happens. Right now, that probability, I do not see anything changing in the next 6 to 12 months, unfortunately. We will know that they're corrupt in Ukraine. They know that we do know that they're corrupt, and nobody is ready to put everything on the scale to change it. So they'll be pissing in your face, telling you it is rain, and you'll be dying for them in the trenches while they'll be stealing money on energy, stealing money on the military orders, and the military industry. And Ukrainians will have to pretend that not everything is so simple. Of course, there is corruption, but we do have the supreme leader who is defending us, who is holding the front. So we will investigate that, but we're not going to change horses at the crossing. So it is just too heavy to acknowledge, and it will not be happening immediately. And societal schizophrenia will have a very interesting hue to that, when everybody understands that the king is not only nude, but he's actually corrupt. He's corrupt and he's a criminal offender on a lot of articles of the code, and people will be convincing themselves that it's just not the right time. We should not be prosecuting him now, we'll do it later. Alexei, how are we going to get money? How are we going to get support then? Oh, there will be. That doesn't affect it. Europeans will be giving, especially even Americans will be giving. They'll be giving less on the backdrop of elections and other things, mostly because of their internal issues, maybe on the backdrop of re-elections to their Congress. There may be some of those who support less funding from the United States who can prevail, but Europe will pick this up, and big politics will play that. Complete lack of any morality, any ethics, lack of professionalism will only instigate that situation unfolding in the way I just described. And human lives is just a fodder for big politics. Another good news is that the moment it will be not politically convenient for big politics, they will turn on a different speed, a different direction, and then Zelensky will be, and his government will be thrown out. So if at some point there'll be a comment that he is bad and his policies are bad, nothing will stop. Even the historical pictures in Times Magazine will not save his ass. Even his way of dressing and appealing to people, nothing will work. So, Alexei, why do you think Umerov went to Istanbul? Negotiations? I think it's the planned exchange, perhaps, of prisoners of war. Maybe unplanned, exchange 1,000 for another. We don't know yet. We'll see when the news come out. If there'll be a lot of news published about a big exchange of prisoners of war, where a lot of our defenders come back, then probably it's part of the counter-crisis measures that Zelensky office is implementing. If they'll be peddling more the topic of negotiations revival, then it's probably towards Americans, pandering to Trump's government, saying, hey, you wanted us to negotiate with Russians, here we are. And then, of course, there is a third option that they'll negotiate on something real on the front, but these people cannot not lie. They have already cheated and deceived everybody. Okay, so, Alexei, the remarks from Rubio recently that nothing was agreed upon, the Budapest was not agreed. And today he's coming and saying that everything is in memorandum. We cleared our position. Both sides can just follow these points and that'll be the end of this war. And suddenly Umerov is flying over to Turkey. Well, Alexander, neither Ukraine nor Russia is going to fulfill American memorandum. And on the West, they do think that Russia will start collapsing economically soon, and by April of 26, they'll be facing default and they'll be suffering a real chance of not being able to conduct military actions in the same scale that they're doing now, because they'll run out of money and money to support their military action. So, like Trump said, let them fight. He made this point not accidentally, because he's getting a lot of intelligence that Russia is on the brink of a serious economic crisis. Whether it's true or not, we'll see. You may disagree with the reality, but this is the strategy of the American office. So nobody is going to give Russia and those 4 districts in Crimea quietly and demilitarize and do whatever else they want with Ukraine. But Russia has captured a couple districts, Donetsk and Lugansk, almost completely, and there'll be likely more fighting for the next 6 months. Now, if American aid will likely start dwindling in December, which is a probability, December, January, then it will be really difficult for Ukraine military. But even then, nobody is going to surrender or present things to Russia for free. Now, as for Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov, who is supposedly under some scrutiny, this perhaps is showing that there are a lot of rumors in Ukraine that Ukraine is happy to grasp on. He is not removed from his position. He is, perhaps he was indeed treating his cold, But yeah, he's not being replaced yet. Alexei, we saw another publication today in Ukraine that Putin will be taking it in 3 stages, and the final points will be Kharkov, Nikolaev, Odessa district, like Arestovych said back in the day. Well, excuse me, but Kharkov district already has 25 extra buffer kilometers. In Zaporizhia, there is a breakthrough. And Kherson and Nikolaevsk districts, that's a big question mark. Why? Because crossing Dniepr or combined ground and aerial operations across the water barriers, one of them is the Black Sea, another is a Dnieper River. It is more complex than it may seem. That may happen only under complete collapse of our defense on the south, when Russians will just walk in. Although, and it's pretty far, it's not happening yet, although our front is cracking up in some places. Zaporizhia is probably under more risk. Alexei, I want to review the situation on the front with a very untrivial start. Let's look at the Zaporizhia first. Bezugla wrote about that. She was attacked together with Bunyatov by people in Ukraine, saying that while we're being told stories about 350 because there was some fog that entered Pokrovsk, and they counted them, right? Exactly, Alexander. Somebody counted those 350 in Pokrovsk under the cover of fog. And now they're talking also about Zaporizhia, about the surrender or encirclement near Gulay-Polya, and Russians, and I do not remember that for quite a while, official acknowledgement that Ukrainian forces are withdrawing from Uspyanovka in that region. That has not happened for a while. Apparently the events, I think, Alexander, are happening so catastrophically and so fast that they decided to do some damage control and talk about that. And perhaps they got an order from the office to play the difficult truth. Why? Because on the backdrop of a difficult truth and crumbling front, you can always say, what Maidan are you talking about? Our front is hanging on a thread, and you should not be. It's not the time to change the government. So I would not be surprised that there'll be more truth coming up from the front. And those people who will be talking about, let's remove Zelensky from power, they'll be immediately pointed out as Moscow spies. Because, look, nobody wants to do that power replacement during the critical crisis on the front. We cannot be playing politics here while Gulay-Polya is being encircled. While many military already is starting to write and post that in Dnipro, we used to be Dnipropetrovsk city, military units are already dividing certain underground fortifications between them. So that already tells you what military really think about. Wait, Alexei. So can you translate that from semi-military to the civilian? Well, when the front is about 70 or 80 kilometers away from the city starts to be penetrated by military and eyed upon different objects, and some of the rare detachments need to devise locations for command outposts, for operative activities. So they're starting to divide basements between themselves, and that's what they're writing about, that the basements are already being committed, according to some military publications. But the main idea of Mariana, she's saying a very remarkable thing, that while media, operative, and political attentions are tied in Dobropolye and Pokrovsk, Russian generals, by drawing the last of the reserves that Ukraine has, are basically drawing bare the other parts of the front. And they're solving a task of breaking through in Zaporizhia from south to the north. And in Dnipropetrovsk, they're going towards the west. There's about 25 kilometers protrusion there. This is roughly 2/3 of a distance of a modern drone that can reach 25 kilometers. It's the length of 150 millimeter artillery. So this basically is a front township, a city at the front. So if that will continue, and Pokrovsk and Mirgorod group will be encircled, and I don't think we have enough reserves looking at what we're saying. And Zelenskyy is talking about some counteroffensive up in the north, but not in that area. So Russians may get extra 50 to 70,000 troops if they close that encirclement. If 40,000 of them leave for Dnipropetrovsk front with the perspective of encirclement of Gulay-Polya group, and 30 will be thrown down south to Zaporizhia to aid in breaking through, our front may not weather it well. All these breakthroughs, small ones, the big ones, this is like water leaking through the wall. At first the wall becomes wet, then you see some drops, then you see streams, and then eventually the wall is about to collapse. Today we're already seeing some streams. And the reasons are still same as we've been calling them out for the last 5 years. First of all is lack of personnel. And unfortunately we have some, in quotes, great minds managing our army, like recent statement that we do not have infantry, we need to learn how to fight without infantry. And Masha and Serezha likely will figure it out, right? So those authors of publications. So rely on them, things will be happening well. And military just giggling looking at that because it's sometimes in despair. Mariana is being attacked for her publications, but the same idea prevails. You draw attention from one part of the front while you're doing something there. Remember then at the airport, the DAP operation. We had a little bit of reserves. Russia started working on that airport, and Poroshenko told Moshenko to not allow Russians take it. Now, we really had heroic units fighting in that airport that was shot through, and it was bitter cold, and we burned our reserves there completely, trying to hold for that unholdable area. And when there was the Baltova situation operation, there was not enough reserves to deblock them there. This is the law of hand-to-hand fighting. You indicate the lower angle, and you attack on the top. You indicate the left, and you attack on the front. Russians know very well that Ukrainian leadership are eager to drop for some PR. So they're glad to help to create another fort, another desire in Ukrainian leadership to create another PR event of how Ukrainians are holding something, and meantime use it to grind down Ukrainian reserves. So, by the way, why Russians value that a lot, you can see that it was Russian Federation president. Mr. Putin came out with a statement saying that Pokrovsk is already taken. And everybody were laughing, saying that, oh, Putin is dumb, and Gerasimov, who cheated him, and reported that Pokrovsk is taken, while Pokrovsk is not taken. And everybody were laughing why Putin is making such a blunder. And our guys said, look, we will show Putin that he is wrong, we will take Pokrovsk back, and we'll plant our flag, and we'll show him that he was wrong. And of course, they dumped reserves there. Zelenskyy visited two command outposts. Budanov dropped there with the helicopters and showed that Pokrovsk is still ours. Budanov already has a fantastic portfolio of these events, like he's fighting against Putin and Yermak as well. Journalists are really trying a lot to make sure that they don't get drafted. And here Putin lost his face, even though he promised that Pokrovsk is Russian. But they are failing to understand that this was an intentional trap, intentional media pumping of Pokrovsk to make sure that Ukraine dumps their reserves in that place. And then they were basically semi-encircled, tied up there. Meantime, Russians are breaking through in Kharkov, making two breakthroughs in Zaporizhia direction, under Dnipropetrovsk. And Pokrovsk itself is still, even though we in Ukraine put an effort into holding it, nothing is really well there. So Ukrainian leadership fell again for this Russian maneuver. And we should have learned that. It's been since 2014 that we're falling. But since we have no reserves and nothing to cover it with, we're like that naked king. You can do whatever, but there is nothing. Alexei, how come we have no reserves? They are drafting people left and right. Well, Alex, they're running away. Yeah, you can see the videos of 5 to 6 draftsmen picking out people in the street, break into homes, but there are no reserves. Well, yeah, they all go AWOL. Look, officially we have 300,000 AWOL, 340,000 according to the recent publications in the open media by the congressman. And many people are saying that maybe it's wrong number because some people leave there, go AWOL several times, and each time they get paperwork started. Well, you can also say that in many cases they never start the paperwork. But if you count all the power agencies that we have about 1,200,000 people, including bodyguards, police, and other agencies. A third of them is AWOL. Add the ones who are training, who are dead, who are wounded. Add the non-fighting units, because even in the American army, it's only 28 people who are actually fighting the enemy in the combat action. The rest are providing resources and support. They're not shooting. So we have about 300,000 AWOL, 1 out of 3. 2 are non-military, non-fighting units. So you have about 200,000 roughly. And there'll be transport and communications and included into these 300 to 250, 300,000, out of which we're losing about 10,000 people a month. AWOL, wounded, etc. So now you can understand that in this rough math, about 150,000 people are holding our front. How does that correlate to the station on the ground? 1 kilometer of the front may be defended by 4 to 6 people. Russian group there is up to 700,000. If it's the same proportion, they have about 200,000 in active action, and they have ability to create local advantage. Given that they continue the draft, one can say more effectively than Ukraine, they can create local advantage in a local area of the front. They are not defending, they're attacking. And since our leadership is making that stupid mistake since the beginning of this war, when we told our troops to hold the positions, we lost all ability to maneuver, to create surprises for the enemy, to create traps for them on the strategic, operative, and tactical levels, because that order basically tells Russians where Ukrainians are going to be. They'll be holding every trench by any means necessary, and they'll be holding on to that. So they know where we are. And all these fantastic Kherson and Kharkov operations, they're done with. We cannot repeat them under this guidance. And our order to stand and hold, with that order, we turned our defense, our army, into a beef patty that Russians are rotating on the plate and just choosing where to take a bite from it. And it took them a while to grow their recruitment, a couple years to get to the tempo they need. And they also calculated rather well that they need one simple maneuver. They need to escalate the importance of certain event on the front, and Ukraine will respond by sending their reserves to that area. So they'll bear the other parts of the front where you can actually execute your operations there that are more meaningful to you in reality. That's why Pokrovsk is in the media limelight, while Zaporizhia is facing Russian breakthroughs. And this is a strategic media operation with the highest level of media support in Russia by Putin. Unfortunately, our leadership, our media is not catching that. End of the first segment.